Record. There we are. Thank you all for joining us on this chilly January evening. My name is Erin Miranda. I'm the Executive Director of the Waterfront Historic Area League in New Bedford, also known as WHALE. And thank you for joining us for tonight's Preservation 101, a plain English look at what preservation is, how it works, why it matters to everybody, whether you own a historic home, historic building or not, or you're just interested in history. So as you all are probably aware, WHALE is based in downtown New Bedford. We were founded in 1962 to help save and reuse the city's historic buildings. As I said before, just some housekeeping. The presentation is being recorded, so it can be shared on our YouTube and social media channels as part of our educational programming. We ask that you keep yourself on mute until the Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. If you prefer not to be visible, you can turn your camera off. And if during the course of the presentation you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and I can go through and read those afterwards. If we don't get to every question by the end of the time, which I'm hoping we will, I'll save the chat and we'll be sure to follow up and answer the questions and post that to our website. So, okay, there we go. So why are we doing this talk and what does historic preservation actually mean? If you've joined us this evening, you're probably familiar with historic preservation or at least have heard the term. It sometimes can sound rather mysterious and maybe sounds a little intimidating. Some people think it may mean that you can't do anything to a historic building. But what I'd really like to do tonight is just to really break down what preservation is in plain English without jargon. If I do say something that you don't understand, drop something in the chat. And again, if you do have questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. So we're just really basic, what does historic preservation actually mean and what does it look like in New Bedford or your community, wherever you live? So, go. So what is preservation? I love this term from the National Park Service. Historic preservation is a conversation with our past about our future. At its heart, it's very simple. What is important to our history and what parts of our past do we preserve for the future? It can mean utilizing and adapting our older buildings so they can continue to serve our community and meet modern needs. For example, you can have former school buildings being reused as housing or historic churches being reused as performing arts centers. So what preservation is not? Preservation, and I should just preface this, I went to school for historic preservation. I have a degree from Roger Williams University. I loved historic architecture. I loved old buildings. And what I've gleaned from my education and my career in preservation is not anti-development, anti-change. It's really about helping guide change and being a part of the conversation and about community planning so that the community can keep its character, stories that are important to it, and so that your community, in our case, New Bedford, stays New Bedford and we protect what is important to the past and so it can remain for the future and continue to have layers of history and stories added to it. This is something that WHALE really was founded to save, especially in the 1960s in the area around the historic waterfront district. If you're familiar with the area immediately around the Whaling Museum, you know very well where WHALE's roots are and what we've done over the past 60 years. So why does preservation matter? Preservation really helps to give a community a sense of place. It does have some economic value and also environmental value. You know, we're hearing about climate change continually, reusing an existing historic buildings with lots of embodied carbon, materials that traditionally are old growth wood. They have longer useful lives. There's an environmental value of reusing historic buildings and preservation, and also community identity. The buildings, the places and spaces that we build and make really are a mark in time. And as we continue to use them and they evolve over time, those layers of history and story are added to these places. That's why New Bedford feels like New Bedford and not, as we sometimes in preservation say, Anywhereville, USA. And why is New Bedford special? I'm just using New Bedford here. If you're joining us from outside of New Bedford, why is your community special? I think we all know it doesn't take much. You don't have to walk too far around downtown New Bedford or New Bedford in any of our neighborhoods to see why it's special. It is an incredibly preserved New England city. We have so many historic resources, and New Bedford has been a leader in many ways over its history, but especially through preservation. So, and also, well, I should just go back one bit. Sorry. Um, in addition to what makes New Bedford special, over 80% of New Bedford's housing stock is considered historic. And that actually leads right very well into the next slide of what makes a building historic. So I'm going to get into the part of the presentation where I will be using some terms that you traditionally hear when you're talking about historic preservation. So historic. Why is my building historic? What makes it historic? The first and most obvious is its age. There's also architectural significance. It's architectural history. There's also cultural and historic significance that could be at a local level, a state level, or even a national level. It's really not just about fancy mansions. And as I say that, on the screen here is a picture of the Roach Jones Duff House, which was a whale project in the early 1980s. But it's not just about the very high fashion, larger buildings. Worker housing, historic storefronts, mills, and schools really tell the story of our communities. And ordinary buildings can have incredible stories attached to it. In the previous slide, this is a picture of, if you're familiar with New Bedford, you probably recognize the Nathan and Polly Johnson House on 7th Street. And this is the headquarters. This is now owned by the New Bedford Historical Society. But just it may not seem that impressive, but we know in New Bedford that this site is a historic landmark and just has so much historic significance and connection to New Bedford and the United States as well. So sorry, getting a little ahead of myself. So as I was saying, sometimes while preservation, when it began in the mid 1960s with the National Historic Preservation Act in 1966, it initially, the first swath, it was looking at those places that were extremely historic, where, that ties to the founding of our country, places that had extreme significance, architectural significance, ties to iconic American figures. But there has been a real push, I would say, over the past several decades to reflect more varied histories, more stories and interpretations. And age is also a factor. You technically only have to be 50 years old to be considered for listing on the National Register of Historic Places, and we'll get to that in another slide. So if we're thinking of that, that's only 1976. So preservation is continuing to evolve, and what we're thinking of as historic continues to evolve with it. When I first started working in preservation, the mid-century modern movement, Philip Johnson's Glass House. So we had these recent past buildings, and people were really struggling to even find the terminology of how to describe them, because a lot of what we think about historic buildings, we think about Georgian Revival, Greek Revival, what we consider, and we see a lot of in New Bedford, historic buildings. So we are, when we think about it, really living history. So, and when if we use the 50-year rule, when the National Historic Preservation Act was passed in 1966, 50 years prior, only would have been 1916. So there are some myths in preservation. I'm familiar with them. I think anybody who is, is involved with older houses, likes history, historic houses, you've probably heard some of these before. If my building's historic, I can't change anything. Old buildings are unsafe, or they're not energy efficient. Preservation is too expensive. As I said, it's only for high style buildings or well-known historic figures. Buildings change over time. What may begin as a small Greek revival has lots of changes made to it. The house we're showing here in the picture is 149 Allen Street. It actually began as a Greek revival, and as it evolved, it had trim put on in the mid 19th century. So it's reflecting the different periods and styles of its existence over time. This is a property that Whale developed and sold to a first-time home buyer in 2018. So there are many layers of history in historic preservation, and it's sometimes it's a constant debate. Do you take it back to when it was first built? Do you want to reflect those layers of history and the stories that are present in the building? But we really look at our historic buildings as almost like time capsules. They're really telling all about the histories, the times they've lived through, the history they're reflecting. And a lot of our Wales work, the work that our organization does, is rehabilitating buildings. So we'll take buildings, we'll upgrade them, we'll update them with modern amenities and materials. So a lot of these myths we can very easily dispel. Preservation oftentimes is an expense, but when you break it down, it's oftentimes not any more expensive than brand new construction, and environmentally friendly because the greenest building is the one that's already existing. So now I'm going to get into talking about some tools of preservation, and you may be familiar or have heard some of these terms before. And again, if at any time you have any questions, just feel free to drop them into the chat. So preservation comes with a set of tools. Many of these were developed with the National Historic Preservation Act in the 1960s, but we've added to them over the years. So we have things like local historic districts, design review, the National Register of Historic Places. I'm sure many of you have heard that. Preservation restrictions. There are grants and tax credits. Some of these tools are meant to identify and protect buildings. Others are meant to help pay for the work, and some encourage good projects, and some work to keep communities intact and character in place. But I would also say that another great tool I didn't put on here is the internet. We have at our fingertips such a plethora of information and resources to tap into. In the chat, I put in a few links that I thought might be helpful if anyone's interested in following up, including the New Bedford Historical Commission, which is staffed by the New Bedford Planning Department, the Massachusetts Historical Commission, New Bedford Preservation Society, and also a link to some historic homeowner FAQs that Whale has on our website. So if you have a question, or you are curious about a tool, or want a little more information on something, please feel free to put it in the chat. And I will say that Whale is actively working on putting a historic homeowner resource guide section of our website in place. It's something that I hope to have up by ideally the middle of the year. So we can use our website as a clearinghouse. So if you, or someone or anybody really in New Bedford or even the South Coast region has questions, we can use our website as a clearinghouse to direct people to the best information where they need to go. So they have the best information at their fingertips. So moving on to local historic districts. Local historic districts are amongst one of the strongest preservation tools because it's really the local level. They are regulated by a historic district commission. In New Bedford, they're overseen by the New Bedford Historical Commission. It really governs, these are districts that are already laid out, properties are identified. Any changes that are made from a public way, they need approval. So there's a process in place to help protect the historic character of this particular area, and also why it's significant. For example, in New Bedford, we have the Abolition Row Historic District, which is along 7th Street. There's also the Mechanics Lane Historic District, and then there's also the County Street Historic District in New Bedford. And again, these are overseen and managed by, excuse me, the New Bedford Historical Commission. These have to be researched, and the district has to be voted on by a community. But these are amongst one of the strongest local tools to protect important places, areas, and buildings within a community. So this is a term you've probably heard before, the National Register of Historic Places. So this is a national program. It was created by the National Preservation Act. Since it's national, it's actually administered in the state by the Massachusetts Historical Commission, which is based up in Boston. Just because your property is listed on the National Register does not mean you can't change your property. It is really an honorary designation unless there's public money involved. For example, if you had a historic home and the state was planning a highway and they wanted to have it go right by your house, there would be a whole process that would be triggered to evaluate whether or not that publicly funded project um, would have a bad effect on your historic property. Um, the National Register is really a list of places, local, state, and tribal, that are of local, state, and tribal national significance that Americans believe are worthy of preservation. And again, it is national, administered by the Massachusetts Historical Commission. And the Mass Historic Commission, again, which is based in Boston, has a really great overview of the National Register on their website. And I've put that, it's in the chat and it's also on the website here as well. And I'm thinking of doing another presentation about how I show you how you can find all the information that the state has, how to use their Massachusetts Cultural Resource Inventory System, which is a massive database of all the historic information that the state has about historic places in Massachusetts on their website. It's a fantastic resource. I use it several times a week. It can be a little intimidating at first, but if you're interested in finding out the history of your historic building or of an area, or just wondering, it's a fantastic resource. So I'm thinking of doing another presentation on that. And they also have really great trainings on their Mass Historic website. So if you have any other information, any other questions about National Register, that is a really great resource on their website. So moving on, the economics of preservation. So why are we talking about economics? You're probably here because you may own a home. So how does my home contribute to the how does preserving my home contribute to the economy? Preservation in and of itself is a really great economic driver. It creates jobs. It's a very trade and labor intensive process. So historic rehab projects often retain very skilled craftsmen. So you'll find a lot more workers on historic projects. It increases tax revenues. If you've restored a home, you probably are aware of that. It also contributes greatly to economic and community revitalization. Preservation, it's been proven all over the country, and I think we see it right here in New Bedford, that when people invest in their properties, when they take care of their homes, you know, the neighborhoods and the community, it's stronger, it's healthier, and it really ties communities together. So, and rehabilitation projects do create more local jobs per dollar than new construction. And if you've gone anywhere in New Bedford, you see a lot of the mill and downtown projects have actually have done that. And did I talk about tax credits? And especially programs like historic tax credits, those projects wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for them. I'll also talk a little bit about adaptive reuse. Again, not applicably related to owners of historic homes, but old buildings can be updated for new uses. What we have on the screen here is the Hillman Street Firehouse, a project that is now under construction. And by the end of April, this once vacant, 30-year vacant and deteriorating firehouse is going to be 8 new units of housing. This is something that's been done for hundreds of years in other countries, but using the past to meet current and future community needs. So just because something was built as a school, it was built as a mill, doesn't mean it can't have a new use. If the community needs more housing, how can we use what we already have to meet those current needs? So just quickly, if you're here, you're probably a little bit familiar with WHALE and some of the work that we do with historic preservation. WHALE really got its start acquiring historic properties, stabilizing them, renovating them, and finding preservation-minded buyers. Especially in the 1960s and 70s, we did a lot of this work. We were literally moving buildings into the downtown district, stabilizing them, and selling them to people who undertook those preservation restorations all on their own. We use a lot of preservation tools, but I think one of the most important things that we can also do, in addition to our bricks and mortar work, is advocate and educate for preservation. So we can help people understand it. It's not this big impediment to development. We're not sometimes we're seen as the people that say, no, you can't do this. But as I said at the beginning, preservation is a conversation about the past. So how can we have a seat at the table and talk about how do we preserve the best of what we have to meet current community needs? And those conversations are where community is strengthened, and where um, I think those relationships are made, because preservation involves so many different partners and players. And when you finish a preservation project, the list of everybody who was involved and helped is just mind-bogglingly long. But at the end of the day, you have a community that's come together around a particular project. What's featured on the screen is actually a picture of our general manager, Diane Broder, learning how to restore windows for our first Baptist church project, which is now the Steeple Playhouse. That project took 10 years, but the community that came together around that project and everybody who was involved was just incredible. So using our own preservation projects as great examples of how to use preservation, but also advocating for preservation policies, funding, and also educating and supporting people who want to do it themselves, like you as historic homeowners. So just a couple of preservation success stories. These aren't just whales. A lot of them are, but a number of them were saved by other organizations, or we started the work and then someone else picked it up. For example, the Zeiterion, I know not a historic home, but Whale saved that in the early 1980s, and it just completed another massive rehabilitation. So we started the work, made sure these places were still here, and then others are perpetuating and building on the success that Whale had years ago, but also I think the ethic and the mindset that preservation is important to the community and all the benefits that it brings. So homeowner questions. And I know there's probably going to be a lot more in the chat afterwards. So as historic homeowners or older homes, because like we said, if your house was built 1976 or before, you technically could be considered historic. A lot of the questions that I would receive at Whale and I got at my previous time with Preservation Massachusetts, where do I go with my questions? Where do I find the information? As I said, we have the internet, but sometimes it can be a little daunting knowing trying to figure out where to start. Who do I go? Who do I ask my questions to? What style is my house? I don't know how to find out what style of my house is. Is it Greek Revival? Is it Gothic? Is it Colonial? How do I find out if my house is listed or has a historic designation? Or how do I find out its history? Who can I find to do the work? I need someone who is experienced with slate roofs. How do I find somebody who can do this work? And the number one question we always get is there money? That is the number one question I've received in nearly in over 2 decades of preservation work. And if you have that question, be sure that you're on our following us on social media or on our email list, because we're going to be doing a similar virtual presentation in March talking about funding for historic homeowners. So shameless plug right there. And another thing, another thought that I had for what I thought would be beneficial, and again, I'm very interested to hear what you have to say, for specific things like architectural styles, or how to find out the history of a property. If you think it would be beneficial to have a presentation like this, or we bring in someone who has experience and can talk about particular styles using live examples from New Bedford, I think that's always a great example. And that's always a great way when you hear a particular style and then you actually see what that looks like and where you can actually find it in New Bedford. If you'd like that to be its own presentation, please let me know. But really what preservation is, even though we deal so much with the past, it's really all about the future. We're constantly looking at, we're stewards of these properties. We're stewarding them for the next generation so they can make their mark on them. It's about community and the future. So we just happen to be dealing with historic buildings, and we are making sure that their place in the community, the stories they reflect, the stories they have to tell, are there for the next generation to make their own mark on them. We talked about those layers of history. You can have a house that's one style and it continues to evolve over time. That's really what preservation is about. And I think how Whale does its best work. We do the initial, we save, we stabilize, and then we pass off to a new owner, hopefully showing them the benefits of preservation, being there to answer your questions, and showing them that, yes, they can leave their own mark on this historic building, this historic home, and passing it off to its future owners. Preservation can help strengthen neighborhoods, make them healthy and walkable. And really, it's about connecting people, residents, and neighborhoods to place, giving them that sense of place. And that makes where they live, where they choose to live, really special and important. So, so how can you help? Obviously, you're interested in preservation. What can you do? Maintaining your home or your historic building, learning before renovating, supporting your community, getting involved, asking questions. If you don't know where to begin asking questions, my email is going to be on the next slide. I encourage you to reach out to me. If I don't know the answer, I probably know someone who does. But asking questions, getting involved. Preservation is at its best when it's community focused and community led. Preservation has always you see it really successful when it's grassroots. That's how Wales started. That's how a lot of our most influential and storied historic preservation organizations started. That's how some of our most important landmarks got saved, when it was just citizens rallying around a particular point and they showed what was possible. So that concludes the actual formal presentation, and I can open it up to questions, but I just want to thank you very much for being with us on this first recorded Preservation 101. As I said, here's our contact information. We are on John E. Cake Hill in the Port Society Complex. Our website is there, and my email as well. And my email is very easily found on our website. And if you haven't visited before, I encourage you to. We have a lot of really great information on there, and hopefully we'll be adding to that throughout the next part of the year. So I will just see, does anyone have any questions? Comments? Okay. Is it of interest to anybody if we do a similar presentation like this that focuses perhaps just on particular architectural styles as they relate to properties in New Bedford? And I say that specifically because Wales has this fantastic, we call it our coloring book, and my blurring is kind of blurring it out. It was produced in the early 2000s, and all the drawings were done by Arthur Moniz. And it's not only just a coloring book of some iconic New Bedford homes, but it also is a little primer on architectural styles, relevant dates. It's a really fantastic resource. So if anyone would be interested in that, I'm happy to put that one together.
Yeah.
Yes, Eugene.
Yeah, we had a couple of questions.
Sure.
A few months back, I had my insurance company had an inspector go through and look at our entire house. And then he added that you're lucky you don't have one of those historic preservation plaques on the front because your insurance rate would be higher. And that bothered me a little bit. Is that true, or is he just making that up?
Um, this was very fitting. We actually had a historic homeowner workshop in. Were you there?
Yeah, I was there
Okay,
at the
yeah, yeah.
Bethel. Yeah.
There is a lot of. I will say that there is a lot of misunderstanding about what it means to be. You know, you could have a historic plaque on your house. The New Bedford Preservation Society has a historic marker program, which means someone's gone and done historic research on your house. And this is so, but that, Diana, correct me if I'm wrong, that unless it's already in an existing district, there's no other restrictions or protections around there. So.
Yeah, if it's not on the National Register, it's the insurance companies don't understand that those plaques are really just identifying the original owner and the date. But
yeah.
If you're on the National Register, that's a whole different thing.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this is something that's plaguing, as you heard at our November presentation, it's plaguing the insurance industry. And actually the Mass Historic Commission has issued 2 memos to be provided to your insurance agent that basically says, no, if someone's, even if they're on the National Register, it doesn't mean that someone's going to come in and tell you what you can and can't do unless it's in a local historic district. So there's a couple other layers, but yeah, it is upsetting when you think about the purpose of those plaques is to convey very quickly. I mean, it's someone's home. Who lived here? When was it built? What's the historic significance? What's the connection of this particular building to this particular place? And we're just trying to share that information. And it means that they're going to charge you so much more. And I think what we learned from that presentation with Paul and Dixon in November is there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And when I talked about one of the important things that Whale does is advocacy and education, we're looking at, are there opportunities for us as a leader in preservation, I would argue, to add our voice and try to get something done around insurance rates, as particularly relating to historic buildings. And I know we talked about the FAIR plan and what options exist, but there is a lot of misinformation. If you want a copy of some of those memos, I'm happy to provide those to you. It's an issue that we're faced not just here in Massachusetts, but all over the country as well. So.
Did you want to ask your question?
Recently, we received another letter in the mail
Oh, no.
from asking us if we wanted to get insurance, actually, for our water main from the street to the house, warning us that ours happens to be 1891, but would we go to the sewer department to find out if it's ever been replaced, or just assume that it's never been replaced? And
yeah, if you go, I would think
if you go,
I would, I would start by reaching out to either to DPI or the sewer department to try to, or maybe the building department. They can probably pull your permit card and see what permits have been pulled around, just to get a better sense of what that is.
Because it's very expensive to replace that.
Yes.
Is it not? And if it's that old, wouldn't it be not prone to disease or whatever at that
Decay.
point? Decay. Thank you.
Okay.
I think that
you
letter
don't have to
that
know
was
everything about the pipes, but
I think that letter was a general mailing to everyone in the city of New Bedford, and not just owners of historic houses. I received it also, and I think that, over the years, you get all kinds of solicitations from a company who's trying to sell you an insurance policy. But Erin's right. You should check with DPI and see when there might have been a change, because they have been replacing a lot of the lines in the city.
But not from the street to your house. I understood that was our responsibility.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. But if they pull your card, they'll be able to see, because it'd be tied to your address. If anybody in the past, if maybe someone 60 years ago did something, it should still be there. But you can follow up with Department of Public Infrastructure. And if you're not sure, feel free to shoot me an email and I can give you some names. It sometimes can be difficult. Who do I actually talk to? Although I think DPI, I think the sewer contact is pretty well identified on the city website.
It is actually.
Yep. The joys of owning homes, period. But I definitely will. I think we may have to, just because you brought up the insurance question again, I do think we should do another presentation. And I would almost argue that we should probably record it, like do it in person like we did, but perhaps record that, because I had a lot of people asking me questions afterwards because they weren't able to attend that event, and they really had. Someone from Historic New England actually reached out and said, we get this question a lot. Can you share any takeaways from your presentation? So I think it would be good to have another one perhaps later in the year. But I know there's work that needs to be done. So any other questions? Any other thoughts about what? Yes.
Go again.
It's okay.
I was thinking about, you mentioned the ongoing life of preservation. I mean, different styles are put onto other styles, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes you might have, for instance, a porch. The porches go quickly in a wooden house. So the porch would be incorrect for the style of house that you're in, and therefore ugly. So I was wondering about loan programs for historic houses.
Well,
Bad question.
no, that's a very good question. And I'm going to give another plug for March. It's a very timely question because you're right. There's oftentimes, you can have it sounds very jargony, insensitive additions. You'll have a very historic home and then someone put on, a porch from the 1980s. It just doesn't look right. And if you want to, do right by your house and it's important to know what funding options are available for you. And, unfortunately, a lot of when we talk about grants and tax credits, a lot of those programs are really only applicable for like nonprofits or municipalities or businesses. Yeah. But there are options for, we're hoping that there's options for, we're going to talk about some different ways that owners of historic properties can, go look at funding, go after funding. So if you join us in March, I think you'll be, I really encourage you to join us in March. We don't have a date yet, but I will be sending that out. So we'll be doing, we'll update our website, share on our social media, and also do another email blast as well. So that it's a very, very timely question. I'm wondering if you're a little bit of a plan, but thank you for bringing that up because it is important. How do we pay for this? So, as a nonprofit, we fund our projects. We do a lot of fundraising. We go after grants, and we have access to programs. But for owners of homes, if you want to do something, where do you go?
And that can maybe fit into the fabric of the whole neighborhood too.
Yes, definitely.
In terms of getting a loan. I don't know how it would work exactly, but that should, the neighborhood could benefit from that.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, Hank. In November 24, we received many strong requests for nuts and bolts centered sessions, electrical, heating, plumbing, roofing. Nothing has materialized yet a year later. Is there a problem? Thank you, Hank. I still have that really fantastic list from 2024. I would say the only problem is that we're a really small staff and we've been very busy over the past year. My intention for this, at least during these winter months, was to start general and then putting together some of those more specific programs, whether they're going to be virtual or in person, making sure I line up with the people that can answer the best questions. So figuring out and then working with Wales board. We have a fantastic board of directors in our projects committee who have a lot of connections, making sure that the programs we offer are going to be able to help you. So I am sorry this isn't advancing as fast as you would like. We're still committed to this program and having something be more consistent. This particular our particular set of programming, at least the first half of this year, kind of suited itself to being a little more virtual. Granted, because there's also 12 inches of snow outside and it's cold in January. So, but if anyone has any additional thoughts on other sort of presentations they would like to see, please feel free to share. But it's just about trying to figure out the best format to convey that. Making sure that we have, we can have someone talk about it in a room. Is it more beneficial to have someone do a demonstration? That sort of thing. So, but thank you for that, Hank. And I do still have that very large list of really great topics. So. Any other questions or comments? Again, this is an evolving, this is, because we are recording this is going to go on our social media. So if anyone has questions about, geez, what's preservation? We can use this as evergreen content. People can refer to it, hopefully learn a little bit. And as we're starting to build a nice repository of, educational programming that can be helpful and useful to owners of historic homes that you can refer back to. I think that's really what the goal of this has been. So. Just curious, out of that list that Hank put up there, if we were to focus on a nuts and bolts session, really bricks and mortar, what do you think out of this what would you want to prioritize hearing about? Roofing, talking with a general contractor, or historic windows. I know windows are always an issue. roofers? Is there a specific nuts and bolts topic that the folks gathered on this particular call would find most helpful at this point in time? I think I might be pulling my projects committee in a couple of weeks. So. Okay. Roofing, you've done everything else. Historic roofer. Electrical and heating for you. Okay, Hank. Electrical and heating for Hank. Complete system. So, okay. That's really, really helpful, especially this time of year. Okay. Great. Wonderful. Does anyone else have any other thoughts or comments or questions? Wonderful. Well, I appreciate you taking your time out of I almost said Wednesday evening, out of a Thursday evening to join us and help, to talk about preservation and just, you being here obviously shows that you care about preservation, you care about your community, and the work that we do would not be possible without everybody on this Zoom and so many others, and anybody who may be watching in the future. So thank you all for joining us. Again, if you have any questions, my email is very easily accessible on our website. Please feel free to reach out to me. We're here as a resource. This is why I do what I do. And this is, I think, Whale, I said, is a leader, and we have a wonderful community, and I am just thrilled to be able to hopefully give you some information and to work with all of you in answering some of your questions and helping you on your own preservation journey. So with that, thank you all very much. Have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you in March, and I will try to get that date out as soon as possible. So take care, everybody. Have a good night.